Welcome back for another review. After I reviewed the ZS10 Pro 2 last time, this time we are going to talk about the also new ZSN Pro 2. Just like the ZS10, the ZSN line is a more popular IEM line from KZ and can be regarded as a budget version of the ZS10, having just one balanced armature instead of four, but going into a similar direction tuning-wise. I wasn't such a fan of the new ZS10 Pro 2, and since this is pretty similar tuning but cheaper, I was really curious. Maybe this sounds better to me. If you have watched my ZS10 Pro 2 video, the build here is strikingly similar to that one. So a see-through shell, which more and more becomes the standard in the IEM world, I feel, and the light metal backplate that has the typical design of the CSN product line with these cool carvings in there, but no vents this time. Just noting this because a lot of the recent KZ IEMs have pretty cool backplate designs that involve ventilation openings. Still, I think it's a cool design, just like the other KZ IEMs, but it's not as flashy, but more industrial looking. Back to build quality, it's very light, but feels pretty sturdy and not cheap in hand. The backplate actually feels lighter than, for example, the one on the ZS10 Pro 2, but I think it's both metal. Just this one here feels a bit more plasticky and somewhat cheaper. So you do feel an upgrade there when you go to the ZS10 Pro 2. Cable is your typical KZ cable. I actually thought in the last review that KZ maybe did something to the cable. I thought it felt a little bit better, but maybe that's just placebo. It's at the maximum average quality cable, but it works. So shape-wise, this is pretty much identical to the ZS10 Pro 2, and I thought that one was pretty comfortable, so the ZSN Pro 2 is just as comfortable. They have this universal ergonomic shape that KZ uses for some of their IEMs, and I think this shape will be fine for most people. Also, they are pretty light and they sit secure in your ear. The nozzle is neither too wide nor too short or anything. It's just a really universal shape. The cable hook also fits quite well behind my ears. The ear tips are your typical KZ tips, so they work, but in contrast to the ZS10 Pro 2, you do not get foam tips. So yeah, not a lot to say here. Pretty comfortable IEMs. Sound-wise, the ZSN Pro 2 does have a typical V-shape that exemplifies the modern KZ house sound, and that strongly resembles the ZS10 Pro 2 with all switches engaged. Which is interesting because the ZS10 Pro 2 is a lot more expensive than the ZSN Pro 2, and the first difference between these two is that the ZS10 has 4 balanced armature drivers and a dynamic one, while the ZSN only has 1 balanced armature and dynamic. And of course, it does not have any switches. Anyway, how these drivers will influence the sound profile and if you can get basically the same sound for less money here, we will see. But first, let's start with the lower frequencies. Bass is all around and rather evenly boosted, so you have good sub-bass extension, just as punchy mid-bass. And even though there's a nice heft behind the bass here, it's not overdone. Speed is very decent and clarity as control are both very nice. It's a good mix between tightness and still having some body and warmth. So that works well with most genres. Bass guitars especially have a nice growl within the song, but also electronic music works well with the good extension, so you have this deep low bass texture. It's really nice for an IEM in this price range to have this balance between rumbly lows, still having some warmth there in the bass, and no upper bass bloat. Midrange is pretty flat without any weird dips or peaks, with a focus on clarity and openness. Again, just kinda like a budget ZS10 Pro 2. It does sound forward in the upper midrange with vocals, but the midrange also does suffer a bit from this modern KZ tuning where instruments and vocals sound somewhat thin. I give it that. It's not shouty and mids are full enough so guitars do not sound fragile and absolutely present enough without being overshadowed by bass and treble. And all in all, it's a pretty safe mid-range that will work with most of the stuff you throw at it. And again, you always have to look at the price here. This is €17 and this is a pretty good executed V-shape without the typical weirdness in the mid-range and without the overpowering bass. Treble is then emphasized again. It sounds airy and clean, but it does have a tendency to emphasize sibilance sometimes and has this metallic touch from time to time. But on all, the combination of upper midrange and treble does make female vocals shine very nicely. And the treble extension here is also pretty good. It's obviously not an IM for treble sensitive listeners, but it's also not piercingly bright. What I also really like here is how the ZSN Pro 2 does deliver this open stage, open sound feeling without going overboard with the treble. Imaging such as separation are pretty good, and the level of small things you can hear is quite nice for not even €20. So that's an all-around good technical experience here. So I thought, why not make a comparison with the recent IEM's KZ released here. And let's start with comparing the ZSN Pro 2 with the ZS10 Pro 2. Listening back and forth between these two, the ZS10 Pro 2 sounds immediately more technical, cleaner, and even more open. Bass is a bit less tight on the ZSN, but it does sound fuller here and it does have more of this rumbly feeling than the ZS10 Pro 2. The ZS10 Pro 2 does sound tighter to me. Even with the boost all the way up, it sounds tighter. Yeah, just as well extended, I guess, but quantity-wise, it's not as much as the ZSN. For my ears, you get more rumble and just a thicker bass here. Both have this open sound with good staging, but again, the ZS10 Pro 2 does it better. And even though the tuning is pretty similar, the 4 balanced armatures here clean the sound up really audibly. You can actually look this up. The frequency graph of both IEMs overlap each other for like 95%, but they still sound quite different. Everything is better separated on the ZS10 Pro 2. Little things are more noticeable, but with better clarity also comes what I criticized in the 10 Pro 2, namely the thinner mid-range. Objectively, the mid-range with its guitars and vocals is better on the 10 Pro 2. Subjectively, I like the ZSN Pro 2 more because it does not sound as lean. Of course, you can turn down all the switches on the 10 Pro 2 and have a more mid-range focused sound, but the overall tonality is still there. Also, I found the treble to be a bit less hot on the ZSN Pro 2, which was another thing that was bugging me with the ZS10. Technical-wise, it's still really good for the price. It's just not as good as the 10 Pro 2, but it's still really good with imaging, with separation, and all the stuff that's going on in the stage here. In comparison with the EDX Pro X, the ZSN Pro 2 does sound somewhat more clean with bass and mid-range, more open, but the EDX Pro X just has a warmer sound, so that's really just a matter of taste here. I think the ZSN Pro 2 does have like a bit better bass extension, so you just get a bit more rumble there. The EDX Pro X also sounds less bright and just a bit smoother. The ZSN Pro 2 does have a better treble extension and just sounds a little bit more refined. So things like cymbals just shine a bit more through the sound. It's all around a more open sound, while the EDX Pro X again just has this warmer, a little bit pushed together sound. So that's it for this review. I hope I could give you some additional information here. And yeah, stay tuned for more reviews and see you next time. Goodbye.